And thank you, everyone, for the very warm welcome, and a special thank you to Larry and Father Norm for inviting me to be a part of this heart-to-heart breakfast series. This is obviously my first breakfast meeting, and what a wonderful turnout this morning. And it was always good to be greeted by good friends. You can tell it's been a quick 10 months. Amazingly, it was 10 months ago that I assumed the presidency. But it was nice. The first person that I saw this morning was Randy Frame, the person that leads Ohio Edison. Randy was only one of two people that I knew before moving to Akron when he ran Toledo Edison. And he and I became great golf buddies. But it's also great to see Bill and Becky Considine. When I first got the position, John LaGuardia said, the first two people you need to meet is Bill and Becky. And I said, really? Well, tell me about him. And he says, well, he's one of the foundational pillars of the community. He's been the president and CEO of Akron Children's Hospital since the prehistoric ages. He's an alum of the university, and he's just a rock-solid individual. And it's been a pleasure to get to know him. And then Dan Colantone, I saw him this morning, who does a great job with the chamber. And I saw Kyle Kudachief, who's the program manager with the Knight Foundation. The Knight Foundation is so important to our community and so important to the university. And recently, I don't know if you saw, but they gave an unrestricted gift to the office of the president at the University of Akron of $250,000 to help with the transition and the strategic planning at the university. That kind of help is what makes the Knight Foundation so important to our community, and I'm grateful for that. I also saw Jay Gershom this morning, the president of the Northeast Ohio College, let's see, NeoMed, Medical University of Ohio. When I first came to Ohio, it was the Northeast College of Medicine. But he's done a great job of taking what was a college of medicine and turning it into a university of substance, of great vision, of connecting it to parts of Northeast Ohio, all of Northeast Ohio, to really try to serve this region. And I've had great respect for his vision, his leadership, and the first thing he said is, let me know how I can help. And again, these are just wonderful examples of what makes Akron and Northeast Ohio special in terms of how welcoming everyone has been. And of course, our great University of Akron family. Raise your hand if you work for the University of Akron this morning. It's good to have the family here. Now raise your hand if you graduated from the University of Akron. Look at that. That's amazing. So that just speaks to how important this university is and how welcomed that I have felt. And so the first thing to do is just to express a sincere gratitude for the warm welcome that both Tammy and I have received since coming. And I can't tell you how wonderful it is to be with you this morning. Now, my understanding is that this breakfast series really explores the connections between our spiritual values, how those affect our ethical foundations, and then how that influences our workplace values. And that's quite a challenge. That's not the typical topic that a president of a university takes on. But I'm happy to do it today. And in terms of thinking about the topic and choosing the topic for today, it occurred to me that there's a part of our daily life that we tend to avoid, that we don't really like to talk about very much. And yet, I have found that this part of our lives, if properly managed, can be a source of great insight, a source of great strength and personal growth. It can benefit us as individuals and as leaders within our organizations. Now, what is this part of our lives? It's our failures. Our failures. We don't typically talk about that very much. So the title of my talk this morning is Crushed to Wisdom, Finding Promise in Our Failures. Let me begin this morning by just telling you a little bit about what I believe. I believe that we as human beings, we all have strengths and weaknesses. I believe that we maximize human potential, our own human potential, when we learn to leverage each other's strengths, the people around us. I believe that helping people to reach their full potential is one of the most rewarding experiences that one can experience in their life. I believe that reaching one's potential is a lifelong journey, It's not something that occurs overnight. And that journey includes both failures and successes. And I believe that everyone fails. There's no exceptions to this rule. It's not a matter of if, but when. And what matters most is what we learn from our failures and how those lessons make us better. I believe that moments of failure are when we are most receptive to actually hearing what God has been trying to say. And that when He teaches us those important lessons of life, it enables us then to reach our full potential. And if we handle these moments of failure in the right way, whether it's when we fail or when others fail, I believe that's when we are most close to realizing God's will for our lives. That's what I believe. And that's what I've experienced. So for me, I know that to be true. I also know that more times than not, we struggle to handle failure in the right way. I see that when it occurs, we're embarrassed by our failings, or worse, we judge others for theirs. Rather than view failure as an inevitable reality and the opportunity for personal growth, we demonize it as the just desserts of either bad people or bad decisions. But I really come today to say this simple thing. I believe there's a better way. I recently picked up a book in the airport. It was entitled, The Upside to Down, While Failing Well is the Key to Success. Now, I saw this book after I chose the topic for today's talk. I wish I had written that book because so many people need to hear its simple truth that failure is inevitable, that there's no need to be embarrassed or to embarrass others when they fail. The only thing that's important to ask when it occurs is, what do I need to learn from this failure to get better? Is there anything that I can do for others when they fail to help get them back on their feet? After that, it's really a matter of simply getting better and finding God's promise for our future. I believe the ability to handle failure when it occurs in our lives or the lives of others is one of the most important lessons we can learn in life. I love the t-shirts that say, "Be patient, God isn't finished with me yet." I also love the TV series, I hate to admit this, American Idol. Why? I have loved for years seeing young people with a special talent be discovered and then work hard and then to blossom into the musical stars that they were designed to be. I love seeing that raw potential explode into greatness. It's what I love about working in higher education, seeing people of all ages maximize their potential and achieve their dreams. It's what universities do. Now, we're not all meant to be on American Idol or become American Idols, especially me. I've always wished I could sing. But I do believe that everyone in this room has the potential to blossom into the unique stars that we were all meant to be. But it takes time. And it involves failure, sometimes repeated failure, before we find success. There's a pretty wide spectrum in our response to failure. At one end, you find those who are so frightened by the prospect of failure that they try nothing new in their life because, well, if you never try, you can never fail, right? At the other end of the extreme, you find people who don't think they will ever fail. Now, I actually understand those people because, frankly, I was one of them. I lived a pretty charmed life in my younger years. I had experienced a lot of success at an early age. And so I went for a long time before experiencing significant failure. And it was when my first marriage failed. It crushed me. That's the crushing part of today's talk. Now, you don't go into a marriage thinking it would fail, but it did. And when you fail, people begin to pile on. You know how that goes. People who are not your friends are only too happy to confirm that fact. But many others who you thought were your friends, well, they surprise you. And unfortunately, not in a good way. And then you begin the process of self-doubt. You begin to question whether you've ruined everything for the rest of your life. You begin to think that it's over. then your mind begins to work against you. But if you're lucky, that's when someone comes along to rescue you from yourself. A true friend emerges. An angel of mercy in your life appears, and I was very lucky. I was rescued by an angel named Tammy, the dear person who I eventually married and who now shares my life. She was the one who reminded me that God was not finished with me yet. In fact, he was just getting started now that he finally had my attention. Remember, the message today is crushed to wisdom, finding God's promise in your failures. Is there anybody in this room who needs to hear that same message today, that God is not finished with you yet? I'm here to tell you that the dreams that you once had, they're still within your reach. All you have to do is simply acknowledge your failure, learn what you need to learn, and then claim God's promise for your life. And then get on with it. Move on. You may need to hear that in this room. Too many times, I think religious people especially distance themselves or speak harshly about people when they fail. A preacher that I greatly respect once said to me that our job as religious people is not to function as a graveyard and bury the wounded. Our job is to function as a hospital, to help people get better when they fail, to help them heal, to restore them, and then to return them to the life that they were destined to live. In 2012, I was the Senior Vice President, Executive Director of the University of Toledo Medical Center. And on August the 10th, 2012, a transplant surgeon in our hospital removed a healthy kidney from a 20-year-old male. This young man had donated his kidney to replace the failing kidney of his 24-year-old sister. Now, after the organ was removed from the brother, it was wrapped and placed in an icy slush. There it was to be preserved until the sister, who was being prepped for surgery in the adjacent operating room, was ready for her transplant. As the surgical team closed the brother's incisions, a nurse entered the operating room to relieve one of the surgical nurses. The operating team was almost done, so the surgical nurse declined to be relieved. Her replacement then decided, well, that she would just help, that she would start cleaning the operating room while the others completed their work. But what this relieving nurse did not know was that the kidney was still in the icy slush. Unwittingly, she emptied the contents of the container with the kidney down the hospital's drainage system. When the surgeon went to retrieve the kidney, it wasn't there. When the organ was finally retrieved from the drainage system, it was deemed unusable. The sister in the adjacent operating room waiting would not receive a kidney that day. We as a hospital had failed, and we had failed greatly. At the time of the incident, I was transitioning from executive director of the hospital to my new position as provost on the main campus. With those new responsibilities, well, they'd have to wait until I could do my small part to help a devastated hospital team through this unexpected and tragic failure. Now, to put all of this into context, understand that this hospital had performed over 1,700 renal transplants with a success rate of better than 98%. That's an outstanding record, but on this day, it didn't matter. And the media, as you would expect, had a field day with headlines like, "Nurse throws transplant kidney into the trash." Now, what do you do at a time like this, in times of glaring public failure? What does one say to one's colleagues when they fail in such an extraordinary manner? How does an organization recover from a colossal failure like this? I'll tell you what a lot of organizations do. I've seen it time and time again. They conduct what's called a public hanging. They find some poor soul and hang them out to dry. They make someone a scapegoat. And I've never, ever believed that this was the right thing to do. I grew up in the Baptist faith tradition in a refinery town east of Houston, Texas. In moments of failure in my life or in someone else's life, I always remember the story that I learned as a child in Sunday school. You know this one. At the break of day, the person that they called Jesus of Nazareth is teaching crowds of people who have gathered to hear him speak in the temple courts. And in the midst of his teaching, the temple leaders bring him a woman caught in the act of adultery. And according to the story, they made her stand before the group, and then they said, Jesus, this woman was caught in the very act of adultery. In the law of Moses, it commands us to stone the woman. What do you say we do? John chapter 8 states that they were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. Sadly, the religious leaders were using this demoralized and frightened woman to pursue a political agenda. Now, I know that this sort of thing never happens in my organization or your organization, but that's what was happening here. Now, my favorite part of the story is that Jesus chose not to say a word. He stood silently and then bent down and started writing with his finger on the ground in the dirt. Now, as an aside, have you ever noticed that sometimes the smartest people in the room are the ones doing the least amount of talking? Have you ever noticed that? I notice that all the time. I always remember my grandmother saying to me, Scott, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. You should listen twice as much as you speak. I always look for the person in the room who's listening more than seeking to be heard. Jesus did not speak at this moment. He did not respond to their question. He didn't say that this woman had done a terrible thing. He didn't give a speech or a PowerPoint presentation on the immorality of adultery or the devastating effect on the moral fabric of our society. He didn't do any of that. He didn't say one thing. He just knelt down, almost serenely, and began to write something in the dirt. Now, unfortunately, John 8 doesn't say what he wrote. I wish it did. I really wish I knew what he wrote. But as a young man, I remember seeing a reenactment of this particular story, and this reenactment provided an interpretive answer that still resonates with me today. In the reenactment, Jesus kneels before each accuser as he stoops down. One by one, he writes each person's hidden sin in the dirt right before them. And as they read it, he then wipes it away and then moves on to the next person. And he writes that person's hidden sin in the dirt right in front of them. And then he erases it before anyone else can see it. So one by one, he does this to each accuser. Now, when he's finished, he stands to say these famous words, "Let anyone who is without sin be the first to cast a stone." He then stoops and begins writing on the ground again. John 8 says that the mob began to disassemble and go away, quote, one at a time, the oldest ones first, until only Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. Jesus then rises again, almost as if foreshadowing the resurrection, and asks her, "Woman, where are thine accusers? Has no one condemned you?" And she responds, "No, sir, not one." Not one. Not a single one. And Jesus proclaims what I believe to be the essence of the gospel, the good news, "Then neither do I condemn you. Go and avoid the sins that have plagued you. Sin no more." In my darkest hour, someone had to remind me that God does not condemn you. And I'm here to remind you, God doesn't condemn you. In the darkest hour of my organizational leadership, I had to remind others that our failures, they do not define us. They make us better if we can simply learn the lesson and the promise within those failures. I've come here this morning to tell someone in this room, your failures do not define you. Learn what you need to learn. Move on to find God's master design for your life. Try to name a great person who is immune to failure. You can't do it. Thomas Jefferson, John F. Kennedy, Dr. Martin Luther King. What about our biblical heroes? Abraham, David, the man after God's own heart. What about his many failures? The Apostle Paul, his story begins with a terrible and grievous mistake. What about Peter, the first pope? How many times did he deny Christ? Today we have another great pope who in his first interview answered the reporter's question, who is Pope Francis by saying, I am a sinner. Now, if the leader of the Catholic Church is comfortable admitting his failures and shortcomings, why shouldn't we be okay doing the same? Some of us strive to be men and women of faith as it was passed on to us, or perhaps as it was revealed to us through experience. Others live admirable lives guided by their personal standards of ethical conduct and goodwill to all. Whatever our motivations, we all bear the same moral responsibility. Our job is to lift people up, not put them down. Our job is to offer encouragement, not to abandon people when they fail. When I returned to the University of Toledo Medical Center to discuss the kidney incident with the hospital's leadership, I told them three things. One, everyone makes mistakes. Two, today is the day we take a quantum leap forward, not backward. And third, some people are going to criticize us viciously. Ignore them. Rise above the criticism. Celebrate the hospital you will become when we learn what we need to learn from this great failure. And then I always quote my favorite quote, Teddy Roosevelt. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and at worst, if he fails, at least fails by daring greatly. The end of the kidney story was really a story of miracles. One of the medical center male nurses who cared for the young woman who did not receive the kidney that day volunteered his kidney to a donor chain for her benefit. That donation resulted in a near-perfect match 3 months later for the young woman. She received her kidney. That particular donor chain also saved the life of a lady in Colorado who would not have lived otherwise. And the male nurse who donated the kidney began to date the young woman. And their relationship blossomed into something that was meaningful for both of them. Now, a huge price was paid. Medical Center paid $650,000 for their mistake. But it also improved their processes. And it did its part to share its lessons learned with healthcare providers around the world so they could improve their processes. Failure? Yes. Lessons learned? Yes. Growth? Yes. God's omnipotent and omniscient plan revealed in the lives of others? Absolutely, yes. We were all crushed to God's wisdom that year, but we also found God's promise in our failures, and miracles took place. One of the great mentors in my life, Bill Cunningham, the former chancellor of the University of Texas System, once said to me, Scott, I try to be right 7 out of 10 times. Now, I try not to make the same mistake twice, but when I'm wrong, I don't let my ego get in the way either. I turn on a dime and I make things right as quickly as I can. But here's the key part. But I will never hold myself or others to a perfect standard, because the only people who don't make mistakes are those who aren't doing anything meaningful with their lives. And I want my life to have meaning. The greatest scientists, the greatest entrepreneurs, the greatest leaders, one thing they all have in common, they view failure as simply one step closer to success. You know who else who I believe views failure in that way? I think God does. He must. Every great religion, every great faith tradition contains multiple examples of failure as the price of growth, and that can't be an accident. That message is too universal to be a coincidence. Finally, John 8 says, He rose from the ground and asked, Where are thine accusers? Does no one condemn you? And then he says, Then neither do I. And I've really just come this morning to say that to you. He says, Neither do I. He shows mercy. He expects us to do that for others. And on this fine April morning, let us commit ourselves to do just that. For ourselves, for others. Crushed to wisdom, finding God's promise in our failures. Thank you.